breaking the self-sabotage cycle, overcoming self-destructive behavior, rewiring negative thinking, and mastering emotional regulation for anxiety relief and inner peace by Megan Ridley. Introduction. The wind in Antarctica does not just blow, it screams. In January 1912, Robert Falcon Scott stood in the middle of that white scream, staring at a small fabric flag. It was a Norwegian flag. It meant he was second. He had spent years planning, raised a fortune in 1910, and pushed his body to the breaking point to be the first human to reach the South Pole. Now, looking at that flag flapping in the freezing air, he realized he had lost the race. But the loss wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the failure was his own doing. Scott was a brave man, but he was stuck in his own way of thinking. He insisted on using ponies instead of dogs, even though ponies sank into the snow and died. He used motor sledges that broke down in the cold. He ignored the advice of people who lived in the Arctic because he thought his way was the right way. He was a talented leader, yet he steered his team into a psychological death march. As he turned back toward his base camp, the weather turned even meaner. He and his men were running out of food. They were exhausted. In his diary, Scott wrote, "We took risks, we knew we took them. Things have come out against us." But the risks weren't the problem. The problem was a map inside his head that didn't match the ground under his feet. He was a victim of his own rigid rules. Scott and his team never made it home. They died in a tent just 11 miles from a food depot that could have saved them. It is a haunting story because it feels familiar. You might not be freezing on an ice shelf, but you know what it feels like to be your own worst enemy. You know the feeling of being so close to a goal, a better job, a healthy relationship, a sense of peace, only to watch yourself pull the plug at the last second. The ceiling we build for ourselves. Most of us live with a glass ceiling over our heads. It isn't a limit put there by our boss or our family. It is a limit we built. You might have the talent to go further, the brains to solve the problem, and the heart to love deeply. Yet, every time you get close to the next level, something happens. You pick a fight with the person you care about most. You wait until the very last night to start a project that should have taken a week. You tell yourself that you are a fraud and that everyone is about to find out. This is the self-sabotage loop. It is a cycle that keeps us safe in a small, familiar world while the life we actually want stays just out of reach. This cycle is exhausting. It creates a procrastination panic loop that drains your energy. You spend days avoiding a task, which leads to a rush of high anxiety as the deadline nears. You finish the work, but you feel sick and tired. You promise yourself you will never do it again. Then, next Monday, you find yourself doing the exact same thing. You might also feel a sudden spike of anger or sadness that ruins a perfectly good day. One small comment from a coworker makes you want to quit on the spot. Or maybe you withdraw and hide when things get tough, pushing people away before they have a chance to leave you. If this sounds like your life, you are broken. You aren't lazy, and you aren't bad at being an adult. You are simply operating with a mismatched internal map, just like Robert Falcon Scott. Your brain is trying to protect you, but it is using tools that don't work for the world you live in now. When the math doesn't add up. In 1999, NASA lost a piece of equipment called the Mars Climate Orbiter. It cost $125 million. It traveled through space for months, heading toward the red planet. But when it got there, it didn't enter orbit. It crashed and burned in the atmosphere. The reason for the crash was shockingly simple. One team of engineers used metric units, like millimeters and meters, and another team used English units, like inches and feet. They were speaking two different languages of math. Because of that small mismatch, a masterpiece of science turned into a pile of space junk. Self-sabotage is a metric mismatch in your own mind. Part of you, the part that reads books and sets goals, wants to succeed. But another part of you, the part deep inside that handles fear, is using a different set of rules. This deeper part thinks that success is dangerous. It thinks that being seen is scary. It thinks that if you try and fail, you will die of shame. When these two parts of you disagree, the orbiter of your life crashes. You end up doing things that make no sense to your logical mind. You want to be fit, but you eat the cake. You want to be calm, but you scream at the driver who cut you off. You want to be loved, but you act like you don't care. This creates a lot of mental static. In 1927, a scientist named Bluma Zygarnik noticed something interesting in a busy cafe. The waiters could remember every detail of an order as long as the bill wasn't paid. But the moment the customers paid and left, the waiters forgot everything. She discovered that our brains hold onto unfinished business. We have a Zygarnik effect running in our heads all the time. Every project you haven't started, every conversation you're avoiding, and every goal you've quit on stays in your mind like a browser tab that won't close. This static makes it hard to think clearly. It makes you feel heavy and slow. Meeting Jules. In a quiet apartment in Austin, Texas, Juliana Jules Morneau is feeling that weight right now. It is 10:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. Jules is 34 years old and works as a senior project manager at a high-pressure tech firm. On the outside, she looks like she has it all figured out. Her LinkedIn profile is perfect. Her apartment is minimalist and clean. She even has a cute rescue dog named Cooper who follows her everywhere. But right now, Jules is on her hands and knees. She is using a toothbrush to scrub the baseboards in her hallway. She has been doing this for 4 hours. In her home office, there is a laptop sitting open on her desk. A project proposal is due by midnight. It is a big one. If she nails this, she might get the promotion she's been working toward for 3 years. If she fails, she stays where she is. Jules hasn't typed a single word. Every time she sits down at the computer, her skin starts to buzz. It feels like a swarm of tiny bees is moving under her skin. Her heart rate climbs. She starts to think about all the ways the proposal could go wrong. She imagines her boss, a woman who reminds Jules of her own perfectionist mother, looking at the screen and sighing. She hears a voice in her head say, "If you don't do it perfectly the first time, you are a fraud, and everyone will see you don't belong here." To make the buzzing stop, Jules stood up and grabbed the cleaning spray. Cleaning feels productive. It feels like she's doing something. She calls this procrastivity, doing low-stakes tasks to avoid the high-stakes work that actually matters. The clock ticks to 10:15. Jules looks at the baseboards. They are sparkling. She looks at her hands, which are red from the cleaning chemicals. She feels a wave of deep shame. She knows she is sabotaging herself. She knows she is smart enough to write the proposal. But the fear of failing is so big that she would rather fail on purpose by missing the deadline than try her best and still not be good enough. At midnight, Jules closes her laptop. She sends a short, dishonest email to her boss, having some technical glitches with the file upload. "We'll have it to you first thing in the morning." She goes to bed, but she doesn't sleep. Her mind is a storm of what-ifs. She has hit her glass ceiling again. She feels like a passenger in her own life, watching through the window as her own hands steer the car off the road. The transformation this book is for the Jules in you. It is for anyone who feels like they are watching themselves make mistakes they know how to avoid. Right now, you might feel like a subconscious saboteur. You feel like your choices are being made by hidden fears and old scripts you didn't even write. You feel drained, anxious, and stuck, but you are about to become a conscious architect. A conscious architect is someone who understands the internal dashboard of their own mind. They know how to look at the buzzing feeling in their skin and say, "Oh, that's just my brain's security guard trying to protect me. I'm okay." They know how to regulate their emotions so that a bad moment doesn't turn into a bad week. They know how to dismantle the negative loops that keep them small. By the time you finish these chapters, you will have the tools to silence the inner critic. You will learn how to turn that not good enough voice into a background noise that no longer controls your actions. Master the strategic pause. You will discover the gap between a trigger and your reaction, giving you the power to choose how you respond. Identify the invisible anchor. You will find the hidden beliefs from your past that are holding your ship in place and learn how to cut the line. Rewire your brain. Using the science of neuroplasticity, you will build new pathways that make confidence and calm your default settings. This isn't about trying harder. Scott tried as hard as a human could try, and he still failed. This is about trying differently. It is about changing the map. The evidence for change, you might wonder if it is actually possible to change how your brain works. The answer is a loud, scientific yes. For a long time, doctors thought that once you became an adult, your brain was fixed. They thought you were stuck with the personality and habits you had. We now know this is wrong. Your brain is more like a muscle than a piece of stone. It can grow, change, and rewire itself at any age. We will look at the work of people like Dr. Marion Diamond, who proved that our environment and our choices physically change our brain structure. We will explore the stories of people who survived the worst conditions imaginable, like Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who lived through the Holocaust. He discovered that even in a place of total horror, a person can find a gap where they are free to choose their own thoughts. We will also lean on the wisdom of the past. We will walk with Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who had every reason to be stressed and angry. He was fighting wars, dealing with a plague, and being betrayed by his friends. Yet, he wrote a private journal that taught him how to stay calm in the middle of chaos. He built what he called an inner citadel, a place of peace inside himself that no external event could touch. You don't need a medical degree or a throne to use these tools. You just need a willingness to look at yourself with honesty and a little bit of kindness. The journey ahead, we are going to start by looking at why we hurt ourselves. In Chapter 1, we will explore why your brain thinks self-sabotage is a good idea. We'll see how Marcus Aurelius handled betrayal without losing his mind, and we'll look at why staying small feels so safe to our ego. In Chapter 2, we will dive into the amygdala heist. This is the science of what happens when your brain's fear center takes over your logic. We will learn from the strange story of Phineas Gage, a man whose brain was physically changed by an accident, and we will find the gap where your true power lies. Chapter 3 will introduce you to the sieve. As we move forward, we will learn how to handle blackout moments when everything feels like it's falling apart. We will learn how to pull up the invisible anchor of your past and how to use the strategic pause to stay steady during a crisis. We will even look at why your comfort zone might actually be a cage. We'll see how the kings of the past made terrible mistakes because they were too afraid to leave their bubble of safety, and we'll learn how to take the small, calculated risks that lead to a bigger life. Finally, we will walk the path to true freedom with Nelson Mandela. We will see how he spent 27 years in prison not becoming bitter, but becoming a master of his own heart. We will end by building your own inner citadel using the 3 pillars of self-compassion. Let's begin. Jules is still in that apartment in Austin. She is tired and she is scared that her life will always feel this way. She thinks she is the only one who feels like a fraud. She is wrong. The path from saboteur to architect is well traveled. Many people have walked it before you and many are walking it right now. You have the tools, you have the map, and most importantly, you have the ability to change. The wind may be screaming and the ice may be thick, but you are not Robert Falcon Scott. You are not stuck with an old map. You are the one holding the pen. Let's begin the work of drawing a new way forward. Chapter 1: Why do we hurt the ones we want? Old Elias was a man who had climbed more mountains than most people have climbed stairs. He lived at the base of the Rockies in a small cabin that smelled of pine needles and old leather. When I was younger, I went to him because I kept failing at things I actually wanted to do. I would sign up for a race and then stop training 2 weeks before. I would start a wood carving project and then accidentally drop it when it was almost done. Elias sat me down on his porch and handed me a piece of heavy climbing rope. He told me to tie a simple knot. My hands shook and I messed it up. "Do you know why you did that?" he asked, his voice as rough as the granite peaks above us. "I'm just clumsy," I said, "or maybe I just don't care enough." Elias shook his head. He told me that when climbers get near the top of a mountain, their bodies often start to scream at them to turn around. Not because they are tired, but because the brain is terrified of the height. The brain thinks the safest place is back in the tent, even if the view at the top is what the climber lives for. "You aren't clumsy," Elias said. "You have a guardian inside you, but your guardian is stuck in the past. It thinks every big goal is a cliff you're about to fall off. So it trips you up to keep you on the ground. You aren't failing because you're weak. You're failing because a part of you is trying too hard to keep you safe." The lie of the lazy mind. Most people believe a very common lie about themselves. They think that when they miss a deadline, ruin a good relationship, or quit a diet, it's because they are lazy or undisciplined. We have been taught that self-sabotage is a character flaw. We think it's a sign that we are bad or not enough. This is the myth we have to break right now. If you were truly lazy, you wouldn't feel bad about not finishing your work. You would just be sitting on the couch, happy as a clam. But that's not what happens. Instead, you feel a deep, burning itch of anxiety. You feel shame. You feel like you are fighting a war against your own hands. The truth is that self-sabotage is not a lack of willpower. It is a misguided protection mechanism. Think of your brain like a very old house with a very sensitive security system. This system was installed thousands of years ago when humans lived in the wild. Back then, different usually meant dangerous. If you tried something new, you might get eaten by a tiger. If you stood out from the group, you might get kicked out and freeze to death. Today, we don't have many tigers, but our security guard, the part of the brain called the ego, doesn't know that. To your inner guard, a promotion at work feels like standing out from the tribe. A new, healthy relationship feels like unknown territory. Because these things feel unsafe to your old brain, the guard pulls the fire alarm. It makes you pick a fight. It makes you forget to do the work. It makes you stay in bed. You are hurting the things you want to save because your brain thinks it is saving you. The emperor in the mud in the year 175 AD, the most powerful man in the world, was sitting in a tent near the Danube River. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He was the emperor of Rome, but he didn't look like a god. He was tired, his health was failing, and he was surrounded by gray mud and the smell of wood smoke. Outside his tent, a bloody war was dragging on. Even worse, a deadly plague was sweeping through his empire. But the hardest battle Marcus was fighting wasn't against the Germans or the germs, it was against his own mind. Marcus kept a private journal, which we now call meditations. In those pages, he didn't write about his victories. He wrote to himself like a teacher talking to a stubborn student. He struggled with a short temper. He struggled with wanting to stay in bed under the warm covers instead of facing the cold, miserable day. Most of all, he struggled with the urge to become bitter and check out because life was so hard. One day, Marcus received news that hit him harder than any barbarian sword. His most trusted general and friend, Avidius Cassius, had betrayed him. Cassius had told everyone the emperor was dead and declared himself the new ruler. This was the perfect moment for self-sabotage. Marcus could have flown into a rage. He could have let his anger dictate his next move, which likely would have started a civil war that would have burned Rome to the ground. His security guard was screaming at him that he had been hurt, that he was a victim, and that he should strike back with everything he had. But Marcus did something strange. He used his journal to look at his own thoughts. He realized that if he let his anger take over, he would be destroying the very peace he had spent his life building. He saw that his anger was a short circuit in his brain. He told his soldiers that he hoped to capture Cassius alive, not to kill him, but to forgive him. He wanted to show the world that a person could be betrayed and still not lose their inner calm. Marcus Aurelius knew that the biggest threat to his empire wasn't a rebel general. It was his own reaction to that general. He understood that the obstacles in our path are not what stop us. What stops us is the way we turn those obstacles into excuses to give up on our values. He famously wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He meant that when your brain tries to sabotage you with fear or anger, you can use that very feeling as a map. The fear tells you exactly where you are growing. The anger shows you exactly where you are still attached to your ego. Instead of letting the security guard shut down the house, Marcus used the alarm to wake himself up. The invisible anchor Jules Morneau sat in a crowded coffee shop in Austin, Texas, watching the steam rise from her oat milk latte. Across from her sat her boss, Sarah. "Jules, the board was incredibly impressed with your work on the Miller project," Sarah said, beaming. "We're thinking about putting you in charge of the regional expansion. It's a huge step up. More travel, a bigger team, and a significant raise." Jules felt a cold lump form in her stomach. Her heart started to drum against her ribs. On the outside, she smiled and said, "Wow, Sarah, thank you, that's amazing." But on the inside, the security guard was losing its mind. A voice in the back of her head started whispering, "You can't do that. You're going to mess it up. If you take this, everyone will finally see that you have no idea what you're doing. You'll be away from home, the dog will be lonely, and you'll eventually get fired in front of the whole company." As Jules walked to her car, she felt a strange urge. She wanted to call Sarah and tell her she had changed her mind. She wanted to go home, crawl under her blankets, and spend the rest of the night cleaning her baseboards until her fingers bled. She felt a desperate need to stay small. This is what we call the invisible anchor. Jules had a ceiling in her mind. For years, she had stayed at a certain level of success. It was comfortable. It was safe. The moment she was offered a chance to break through that ceiling, her brain treated the promotion like a threat to her life. The invisible anchor is often made of old scripts we learned when we were kids. For Jules, it was the voice of her mother who always said, "Don't get too big for your britches, or the higher you fly, the harder you fall." To Jules's brain, success didn't mean freedom. It meant danger. In that coffee shop, Jules did something brave. She didn't call her boss to quit. She sat in her car, closed her eyes, and asked herself, "What am I actually afraid of?" She realized she wasn't afraid of the work. She was afraid of the feeling of being seen. She named her fear. She said out loud, "My brain thinks I'm about to get eaten by a tiger because I got a raise." Naming the anchor is the first step to cutting the rope. The physics of staying the same. Why is it so hard to change, even when we want to? Science has a word for this: homeostasis. Think of your body's internal thermostat. If the room gets too cold, the heater kicks on. If it gets too hot, the AC kicks in. The goal is to keep the temperature exactly the same. Your brain does the same thing with your life. If you start making too much progress, your internal AC kicks on to cool you down. This is why people often get sick or get into a big fight right after something wonderful happens. Your system is trying to return you to your normal temperature. In the 1950s, a scientist named Harry Harlow did a series of famous and heartbreaking studies with monkeys. He wanted to know what was more important, food or comfort. He gave baby monkeys two mothers. One was made of cold, hard wire but held a bottle of milk. The other was made of soft cloth but had no food. Almost every time, the monkeys chose the soft, cloth mother. They would reach over to the wire mother just to eat, but they spent their whole day clinging to the cloth. They chose security over sustenance. We do the same thing. We will often choose a miserable situation that feels familiar over a happy situation that feels new. We cling to the cloth mother of our old habits, even if those habits are hurting us, because they are soft and we know how they feel. Self-sabotage is just your brain clinging to the cloth. It is the act of choosing the known over the unknown. To break the cycle, we have to teach our security guard that the unknown is not the same thing as the end of the world. We have to show our brain that we can survive the heat of success and the cold of change. The Aurelius method. Talking back to the guard, Marcus Aurelius didn't just write down his feelings, he challenged them. He used a specific way of thinking that you can use today. When he felt a sabotaging thought, like the urge to hide or the urge to lash out, he would break it down into its smallest parts. If he was looking at a fancy, expensive robe that made him feel important, which is a trap for the ego, he would tell himself, "This is just sheep's wool dyed with the blood of a shellfish." By describing things exactly as they were, he took away their power to trick him. You can do the same with your self-sabotage. When you feel the urge to procrastinate on a big project, your guard is telling you, "This project is a monster that will prove you are a failure." Using the Aurelius method, you rewrite that thought. "This is just me sitting in a chair and moving my fingers on a keyboard for 60 minutes. The words don't have to be perfect, they just have to exist. When you feel the urge to pick a fight with someone you love because you're feeling too vulnerable," the guard says, "they are going to leave you anyway, so you should push them away first to protect yourself." You rewrite it, "I am feeling a vibration in my chest because I care about this person. Pushing them away is a trick my brain is playing to keep me lonely and safe. I will choose to stay in the room instead." This isn't just positive thinking. It is accurate thinking. It is stripping away the scary masks your brain puts on things so you can see the truth. The 5 whys of the anchor to find your own invisible anchor. You can use a technique called the 5 whys. This helps you get past the surface level excuses and find the real reason you are hurting the things you want to save. Let's look at how this might work for someone like Jules. Why did I miss the deadline for the proposal? Because I spent 4 hours cleaning the kitchen instead of writing. Why did I feel the need to clean the kitchen right then? Because the house felt messy and I couldn't focus. Why did the mess feel so unbearable today of all days? Because the proposal felt too big and cleaning was something I knew I could do perfectly. Why was I so worried about doing the proposal perfectly? Because if it isn't perfect, my boss will think I'm not as smart as she thought I was. Why is it so scary if she thinks I'm not perfect? Because if I'm not perfect, I don't deserve to be here, and eventually I'll be rejected and alone. The real anchor, the fear of being found out and rejected. The kitchen wasn't the problem. The mess wasn't the problem. The anchor was a deep-seated belief that Jules's value was tied to being perfect. Once she saw that, the cleaning lost its power. She could say to herself, "I am cleaning because I am afraid of being judged. I see you, security guard, but we are going to write the first page anyway." A letter across time. The gray mud of the Danube is gone now. The Roman Empire fell a long time ago, but the meditations of Marcus Aurelius are still read by millions of people. Why? Because the human brain hasn't changed. We are still the same creatures sitting in our own versions of that tent. We are still fighting the same war between our protective ego and our conscious self. When you sabotage yourself, you are participating in a very old human ritual. You are trying to stay safe. But you are also living a half-life. You are staying in the tent because it's raining outside, even though you have a kingdom to lead. The historical echo of Marcus Aurelius tells us that mastery isn't about never feeling fear, anger, or the urge to quit. Mastery is about watching those feelings happen and refusing to let them hold the pen while you write your life story. Your security guard is always going to be there. It's a part of you. You don't have to kill it or hate it. You just have to thank it for its concern and remind it that you are the one in charge now. You can hurt the ones you want to save, or you can choose to save yourself from your own protection. The choice happens in the gap, the small space between the feeling of fear and the action you take next. We are going to look at exactly how that gap works in your brain and how you can use it to stop an amygdala hijack before it starts. For now, just remember, you aren't broken. You're just well guarded. And it's time to let yourself out of the fortress. The myth, sabotage is a character flaw or laziness. The truth, sabotage is a survival mechanism that has gone off the rails. The tool, use the 5 whys to find the invisible anchor behind your behavior. The mindset, like Marcus Aurelius, view your obstacles as the path forward, not the reason to stop. Chapter 2, the amygdala heist how your BR. Your brain can decide you are in danger and trigger a full physical panic in just 12 milliseconds. To put that in perspective, it takes you about 300 to 400 milliseconds to blink your eyes once. This means your internal alarm system is nearly 30 times faster than your ability to blink. By the time you even realize you are thinking about a problem, your body has already started a war. It has pumped your blood with stress chemicals, signaled your heart to race, and shut down the part of your mind responsible for logic and long-term planning. In 1848, a man named Phineas Gage learned exactly what happens when the logic part of the brain is separated from the feeling part. At the time, Gage was a 25-year-old foreman for the railroad in Cavendish, Vermont. He was known as the best in the business. His bosses said he was shrewd and smart. He was a man with a plan, a guy who could manage dozens of workers and keep a complex schedule in his head without breaking a sweat. One afternoon, Gage was using a heavy iron rod, about 3 feet long and weighing 13 pounds, to pack gunpowder into a hole in a rock. It was a routine task he had done thousands of times. But that day, a split second of distraction changed everything. The iron rod hit the rock, created a spark, and ignited the powder. The rod became a missile. It shot upward, entered Gage's left cheek, traveled through the front of his brain, and exited out the top of his skull. It landed 80 feet away, smeared with blood and brain matter. The most shocking part of the story isn't that Gage survived. He actually stood up a few minutes later and spoke to his men. He even sat upright in a cart on the way to the doctor. The real shock was who he became after the wound healed. Before the accident, Phineas Gage was the CEO of his own life. He was balanced, polite, and reliable. After the accident, he was a different person. He became fitful, irreverent, and wildly impatient. He would swear like a sailor and make grand plans for the future, only to abandon them 5 minutes later. His friends said he was no longer Gage. The iron rod had destroyed his prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain right behind the forehead. This is the area that handles decision-making, social behavior, and the ability to say no to a bad impulse. With that area gone, Gage was a slave to his most basic, lizard-like emotions. He had plenty of energy, but he had no steering wheel. He was the first great historical example of what happens when the security guard in our brain takes over and the CEO is kicked out of the building. The security guard and the CEO, every time you find yourself screaming at a loved one over a dirty dish or freezing up during a big speech, you are experiencing a mini version of what Phineas Gage lived through. You haven't had an iron rod through your head, but your brain is acting like you have. Inside your skull, there is a constant struggle for power between 2 main players. The amygdala, the security guard. This is an almond-shaped bundle of nerves deep in the center of your brain. Its only job is to keep you alive. It doesn't care about your career, your bank account, or your inner peace. It only cares about threats. It scans the world for lions. The prefrontal cortex, the CEO, this is the outer layer of the brain behind your forehead. This is where you think about the future, weigh the pros and cons of a choice, and remember your values. The problem is that the security guard has a direct hotline to your nervous system. In the 1990s, a researcher named Joseph Ledoux discovered that the brain processes incoming information through 2 different paths, the low road and the high road. Imagine you are walking through the woods and see a long, thin, curvy shape in the grass. The information travels to your brain and hits a sorting station called the thalamus. From there, the low road sends a messy, low-quality image straight to the amygdala. This path is lightning fast.